present today's webinar, Sustainability in Healthcare Food Service. This is going to be a passionate panel discussion. My name is Janelle. I'm with Performance Reps Northwest and the Education Chair for the AHF Washington chapter. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today. We have Andrew Shakman with Leanpath, Richard Young with Frontier Energy, and Gina Sadowski with Seattle Children's Hospital. So since this is a panel discussion, I would like each one of you to take a moment and introduce yourselves and provide a little overview about your company or operations. So,
thanks, Janelle. I'm Andrew Shakman, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Leanpath, based in Portland, Oregon. And we are focused on helping prevent wasted food. Our mission is to make food waste prevention everyday practice in the world's kitchens. And we do that with technology and measurement tools. And sustainability is very close to our hearts, and looking forward to talking about it today.
Great, thank you. And let's go ahead. Gina, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Janelle. My name is Gina Sadowski. I'm joining you from Seattle Children's Hospital, where I serve as the Director for Nutrition, Culinary, and Retail. We are a about 400, that number changes frequently, bed academic medical center with a mission to provide hope, care, and cures to help every child live the healthiest and most fulfilling life possible. And we are honored to be recognized by Foodservice Director Magazine as one of the Plant Forward Healthcare Organization's watch list for 2021. And I'm honored to join you virtually today. Thank you.
And introduce Richard Young.
Hey everybody, I am Richard Young. I'm a Director of Outreach at the Frontier Energy Food Service Technology Center. And for the last 34 years, the Food Service Technology Center has been studying all the ways that commercial kitchens use energy and water. I mean, all of the different ways. And we are a very mission-driven team. We're a bunch of engineers and nerds, and our mission, every day we wake up, our mission is to cut carbon, cut carbon, cut carbon. However we can do that, that's what drives us these days. So, and really, I'll be talking the sort of energy side of things, and very excited and honored to be here today with Andrew and Gina.
So let's go ahead. We know the last 16 months has been a lot, to say the least. Prior to the pandemic, sustainability efforts were moving in a positive direction, meaning more awareness, more interest in creating and achieving sustainability initiatives and pushing the sustainability envelope. However, the last 16 months appears to have undone some of this hard work, by reintroducing disposables, et cetera. So I want to go ahead and jump into my first question for the panel. And that is, what does sustainability mean in a post-COVID world? And what is sustainability to you? Let's go ahead with Gina.
Sure. Well, sustainability may look different in a post-COVID world, but I feel like really it just gives us an opportunity to recalibrate. So for instance, composting isn't going away, reducing food waste isn't going away, but of course there's an increased focus on disposables and single-use packaging. And this allows us to recalibrate our attention towards our menuing efforts. We're likely already doing things like reworking some dishes to make sure that they hold up in those conditions. And if we're recalibrating our menus, why not take the opportunity to work in more plant-based proteins, double down on other sustainability initiatives, such as meat reduction, less meat, better meat, with a focus on antibiotic-free meats as an example. So it really kind of allows you the space to be innovative. And if you're reworking those menus anyway, as we all likely are based on distribution challenges and product outages, why not take this opportunity to really look at your menuing and how you're supporting sustainability efforts on your menu?
Great, and Andrew, did you have some feedback to that as well?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything Gina just shared. I think if we step back, we've been, I think, earnestly talking about sustainability in healthcare food service for probably 13 or 14 years. In fact, I think Richard and I were probably at the same conferences in the late aughts talking about this concept. And I'm thrilled that nobody on the poll question said, what is sustainability? So I think in some ways what we have to do is step back and say, okay, what has changed? And how does this context ask more of us? And when you think about what is sustainability, to me, it's about sustaining something over the long haul. And to be sustained, you have to be resilient. And what could be a more challenging moment to test our resilience than what we've been through during this pandemic? And so I think in some ways, the business case for sustainability, the imperative for sustainability has only become greater, because we see how much we've been tested, and we see why it's so critical to be operating every day with an eye towards being strong and sustainable and resilient for the long haul. And if you look at the companies that held up best during this time, it's the ones that planned around the long-term view. So I think this is it's critically important. I think it still means many of the same things it always meant, which in practice means sourcing and waste and energy and water and being efficient and being connected to our communities in responsible and intentional ways. And all of that is still true. I think one thing that may be a little bit different is we now also have a little bit more of a social justice and equity lens through which I think we're looking at these things and trying to understand the degree to which the work we do on sustainability is also work that we do on equity.
Yeah. And I totally agree with Gina and Andrew, both on the fact that this is the ideal time to pivot. Like, so many of our systems were broken and changed, and now is the time to say, okay, how do we put things back together? And also the notion that we have to do this. I mean, when we're talking about Seattle and Portland in 117-degree temperatures, we need sustainability because we need to sustain our businesses and our civilization both at the same time. So this is that opportunity to do it. And yeah, it's just absolutely necessary. And I think there's just tremendous opportunity right now. I think there's a lot. I'm optimistic.
Optimism is very good. And, Andrew, you mentioned the word resilient, and I really like that word when we're talking about everything that's going on and sustainability and planning for that long term. I think that's, so important, and what we've all been through just shows how important it is to kind of think long term, but then also, to Richard's point, be able to pivot, right, and to adjust or pull things apart that we need to and put them back together, maybe a little bit stronger than they were before. So with so many other priorities in a kitchen, particularly post-COVID, why should sustainability be on the list? So I'm going to go ahead and let you respond to that, Andrew.
Yeah, so I think there just are a lot of things that we can't control, right? And I know that everyone who's here today, given those poll responses, has already kind of thought this through and why it's on the list for you. But in a world where there are many things we can't control, we have to focus on the things that we can. And there are things that we can do to make ourselves stronger for the future by focusing on sustainability, but also stronger in the present. And one of the things that I work on a lot, and we'll talk a little bit more about, is food waste. But at a time where we're doing a lot of spending in plastics and disposable single-use food service, where we can also be focusing on wasting less food. And so that's something we can control, even if we can't control the number of clamshells that we are unfortunately having to deal with on a sanitation side of things. So I think when you get down to it, most of the things we do in sustainability are also about efficiency. And efficiency is about saving money. And so in a time where forces are causing some costs to go up, we've got to go in and say, how can we find the pennies, the nickels, the dimes, and the quarters that are hiding in our operations? And when we do that work, we're likely to be doing work that is also sustainable.
Yeah. Once again, totally agree. I engineer, very practical. I see sustainability as really a way to overcome a lot of the challenges that we're having in commercial food service right now. We were talking right before we started the webinar about the labor challenges. And you may not think at first that sustainability is, part of that, but from our world, from the equipment side, sustainability, more efficient equipment and better kitchen design ends up making a better kitchen for the laborers. It can bring about, higher quality folks, make it more of a profession. People can do more with less. And then that helps you waste less food, which then, produces less carbon. All these things cascade. We also have, big challenges, particularly right now with increasing food costs. And I know in healthcare budgets, that's always a hard thing. We've got increasing waste hauling costs. Just in general, we have air quality issues. And then, of course, we have all the climate change issues. And, sustainability is just, this quote unquote sustainability is just a practical way to kind of, like Andrew said, control small things. It doesn't take some kind of, crazy technologies. It's just adopting technologies we have right now today to better manage systems, which were not well managed or well designed over the last several decades. And so that's my thought on it. Gina, what do you think?
Thank you, Richard and Andrew. I again agree with everything that you all said. Right now, how could it not be part of the conversation? And when I'm referring to sustainability, we're likely all being asked to do more with less. It's been an incredibly difficult, I would like to say year, but realistically year and a half. And unfortunately, the reality is if you're not running an efficient operation, you're probably not in business anymore. And that applied to healthcare, of course, but I'm talking about smaller restaurants and other commercial kitchens. And I think that there's a stigma that sustainability automatically means a higher price tag, and I don't think it needs to. And it certainly hasn't been our experience. We're talking about working smarter, not harder, to touch on a little bit of what Richard said. The design of your kitchen so that you're not taking so many steps and not overly using labor to do things where there is technology in place that could do that. And also, like I said a moment ago, it doesn't have to be the more expensive option. Oftentimes it's the more economical option, such as focusing, like we've been talking about, reducing food waste or efficient utility use, or shifting animal protein dishes to more plant-based options. Reducing your meat automatically brings down the price tag. So that's a sustainable option that is actually a cost reduction option. So it certainly doesn't have to mean a higher price tag.
Yeah, it's I'm listening to all of you, and there's so many key words I feel that jump out. But you talk about efficiency and labor and technology. And I do think, post-COVID, one thing that happened this past 16 months is all of a sudden technologies that I feel like weren't being adapted so quickly are now being fast forwarded, right? There's more contactless, all of the QR codes and the, ordering by app and everything like that. So it's definitely catapulted us forward. And now, we are seeing from the response on our poll that sustainability is important. How do our attendees or our audience know where to start when it comes to sustainability? It's such a large, encompassing word. So why don't you go ahead and get us started on that one, Andrew? Where do they start?
Yeah, so I think everyone's gonna have perhaps a slightly different approach to this, but I think you got to begin with overall, what are your goals? And Richard talked about carbon, and he talked about climate change and climate action. And I think right now it's a really valuable thing, I think, to start by grounding ourselves in the climate change sector and looking at, we all need to be rowing in the same direction towards addressing climate change and the impacts that it's having, which I think are becoming ever more evident year to year. So I would argue start with a goal. And there can be other goals, but I think that one's a big one. And I think beyond that, you can certainly be looking also at nutrition and healthy populations, because we're really dealing with people and planet at the same time when we talk about these things. So carbon has to do with the planet side, and the people side has to do with making sure that we're feeding people, that there's enough food and that it's nutritious food. And so I think those two sort of North Stars about how do we feed a world that's going to have 9.6 billion people by 2050, and at the same time, how do we deal with climate? Those are sort of North Stars. Then I think you start, once you're clear on that, by doing what's called a materiality assessment in your particular area and looking at what are the things in your operation that are high impact related to sustainability and your goals. Now, the good news is I'll give you the cheat sheet on this, and because when you get down to it in healthcare, food and nutrition services, it's going to have a lot to do with what you buy and from whom and where. It's going to have to do with what you waste and how you waste it and where you send it. It's going to have to do with your equipment and how you use energy, and it's going to have to do with your water and how you use water, right? Those are, like, not to cheat, but when you do a materiality assessment, it gets you there pretty quickly. And so I think start with your goals, look at what's material for you, and then look ultimately at setting targets for things that you want to improve in those areas. And once you've done that, and it may seem a little bit abstract, but once you've taken the time to say, this is my goal, why it matters in my operation, and my target, I'm aiming for cutting my food waste in half. I'm looking to be, twice as efficient in my energy use, whatever it may be. Once you set those targets, then that starts to create a framework from which you can then do programs around sustainability that deliver on those things. But I would argue, Janelle, the place to start is the goal, the materiality, and the target.
I mean, definitely having clear goals makes sense. So Gina, what's your take on that?
I think I agree with what Andrew said, but I almost would start one step prior and say tracking is a great place to start. Building a dashboard in our case, we use Excel spreadsheets for visibility, just to get an idea of what your baseline is. Because to Andrew's point, you want to set a goal and work on what's important to you in your organization. But oftentimes you don't even know what that is unless you know where you're starting, what's your baseline. I know when we started our antibiotic-free meat journey years ago, it was pretty startling to see where our starting point was. We were at, I think it was less than 10% was our initial starting point. Now we're hovering around 80% of our meats being antibiotic free, which years ago I wouldn't have thought that was even an attainable target. But if you can start with tracking to figure out where you are, and then to Andrew's point, figure out what's important to you and your organization, you can start to establish attainable targets. Another great place to start is with food waste. It's certainly not efficient to be sourcing high quality, sustainable ingredients if half of it's ending up in the compost bin. So certainly you want to try to eliminate as much waste as possible from your system before you really start embellishing that menu and with sustainable ingredients.
Yeah. And for me, the place that, I would say you want to start is trying to get help. Let's get other people to help you with this or to do the work for you. And, on my world, the energy side, there's nothing more boring than, energy and, energy into equipment and energy efficiency and that kind of stuff, right? It's not super sexy. So what do we do in the energy efficiency world? Well, we try to get your attention and teach you and guide you with programs. And one of those programs is Energy Star. Everybody's seen an Energy Star label on something. Well, that's something that our facility worked with EPA, the Energy Star program, to get those labels on pieces of equipment so that Gina doesn't have to go and get an electrical engineering degree to figure out what to buy, right? The other thing is, in the utility world, we have these rebates, and the rebates aren't to get you to buy more energy or to get you to buy a certain piece of equipment for, the purposes of purchasing a widget. The rebates are all about education. It's us trying to teach people in the big world without them having to, go review a bunch of spec sheets and get an engineering degree. So if you live in any place where there's a rebate program, use that. Go call your utility people. Get on that website. If you buy the rebated pieces of equipment, then you're doing the right thing. You are achieving sustainability, and it becomes pretty effortless. And in California, we're really lucky. We have a thing called the California Energy Wise program that runs all the way up and down the state of California. And we put all of our resources on there, all the equipment that's rebate qualified, and we have really big, juicy rebates. So if you've got something that breaks down in the kitchen, use that as your guide, and you've started your sustainability program and you got paid to do it. And that's the best way, right? Because this is admittedly is not easy. And then beyond that, go hire professionals. You hire Andrew to come in and help you do the waste analysis, right? And put systems in place. All of these things, this notion of sustainability, those of us who've been doing it for 3 decades, we wake up every day and still feel like we don't know anything. It's a big subject. So get help, get people to help you, and take advantage of resources that are out there. Don't try to lift it all on your own.
And that's a great point, Richard. I mean, I think that's the thing we're always trying to drive home, is that there are a lot of resources out there, so you're not alone. And I think from peer to peer, Gina, what you learn best from each other, right? Somebody else that's in similar shoes, why not reach out to Gina and say, hey, how did you do this? Can you help me get from A to Z? You made a really good point. I think when we're talking about goals, Gina, you mentioned the word attainable targets. I think that's a big part when people are setting goals, that you don't reach for the moon right out of the gate. Sometimes you have to start small. And I know, Richard, that's something we talk a lot about, or used to at Fishnick, is low hanging fruit. Take those baby steps, right, to kind of help you get those success stories, and the success stories help you sell that along the way. So if you do have hurdles that you're coming across, Gina, do you have any quick advice, for how to overcome some of these hurdles when you are talking to management?
Well, I don't know if this directly answers your question, Janelle, but one example that comes to mind with regards to antibiotic-free meats, for instance, is we at Seattle Children's are very lucky to have the support of our infectious disease clinicians behind this work, as it relates to their promotion of antibiotic stewardship. And that's been a key motivator for the organization. So I know that doesn't necessarily answer your question in a global way, but that's one example of finding something that the rest of the organization can get behind. And it's almost like a 2-for-1. There's 2 goals there that cross multiple departments and multiple arenas. So that's just an example of one thing. I'm sure there are others, but that's the first thing that comes to mind.
That makes a lot of sense. Reinforcement, right? So when you can kind of all join together and you have more people behind the effort or the movement, that never hurts. So, I'd like to go ahead and ask Andrew a question here. What role does food waste play in sustainability, and how do you actually prevent food waste from happening to begin with?
Yes. So food waste is, I think, probably known to everyone on the call as a major problem. We waste or lose somewhere between 1/3 and 40% of the food that is produced. So that's a big number, right? If 1/3 of what you're growing and creating is wasted, right? It's a big, big leak. And so when you start working on that problem, it connects to sustainability because it's a nexus issue. When you work on this, you're working on water, because there's a lot of water that goes into growing this product you're wasting. Perhaps 25% of our fresh water is going into food that we waste. Okay, oil and pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers that go into creating these farm inputs to grow this stuff. Right, that stuff all is petroleum based, and maybe 2 to 4% of the oil we use goes right in there. And then, so when you're working on those issues, you're working on food waste, you're also working on water and energy. And then you look at carbon, and we know that about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, and maybe 4% in the US, comes from wasted food, either from the production side or from the landfill side, where it produces methane that goes into the atmosphere, which is 20 times plus more powerful than carbon dioxide in its warming potential. So you've got the GHG impact, the water impact, the oil impact. So from a resource point of view, you also have the fact that as we're feeding the world, we're cutting down the Amazon to do that. And as we do that, we take away carbon sequestration sources, right, that are actually holding on to carbon. And we're putting more carbon into the air and reducing that, that we're also reducing biodiversity. So it ends up, when you start looking at this, food waste is this massive nexus. You push on this one issue and you're working on most everything that touches the whole sustainability world. And that makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, our largest sort of human interaction with our natural environment is agriculture, right? It's how we grow and create things. So that's this sort of portal between planet and people. And so the other part of it is the social side I talked about. And 15% of Americans are food insecure. And that's shocking and should disturb all of us. And it's gotten so much tougher during COVID, as we saw with all the stories on how people were in need and the massive demand for food banks. Well, we were throwing away food in other parts of the world because we just couldn't connect all the logistics. And so at the same time, there's this massive planet and environment problem. There's this social issue and inequity that's happening around sort of food security. So I think in the end, what you find is a holistic view of sustainability is both people and planet. And if you work on food waste, you work on both, and you work on both in a big way. And so for those reasons, food waste tends to rise to people's attention. It also happens to be our business. It's the thing, it's like the product we're making, right? And so let's steward that product. We all got into this, I suspect, because we really see value in food. And I see food as something that connects us. It connects us to ourselves, to our communities, to our families, right? To our culture. And so we've got to honor this. And for all those reasons, food waste is something that really deserves our attention. And then the bonus is when you reduce food waste, you save money, right? Because all that food is just going in the garbage, and it's money in the garbage. And there aren't too many places in your operation, right, where you literally just take money and put it in the garbage. And yet with food, right, we buy a bunch of it. And in healthcare, somewhere between 4 and 10% of the food that we purchase, we end up wasting before it ever reaches a patient or a visitor or a doctor or a nurse. And so think about that, like, up to $100,000 of every million in your food purchases going into the garbage. So for all those reasons, food waste really ranks right up there as a thing to work on. And I'm psyched that Gina's working on it. And so there's definitely reasons to focus on the other pieces as well, but this one is it's got to be on your list somewhere.
The next question I kind of want to touch base on is, how can measurement help you achieve sustainability objectives? Andrew, and I feel like that kind of ties in a little bit with Leanpath.
Sure, and Gina talked about it as well. And I think, there's this classic, right, that we manage the things we measure, and the things we measure improve. I mean, I think we all know that. And in healthcare, right, we have continuous quality programs, right? Whether it's PDSA or PDCA, or it's, Six Sigma, or it's Lean, or, right? I mean, we have different names that these things travel under, but we understand that when you're talking about people's health, the quality of that clinical process is absolutely paramount, right? So we understand the idea of continuous improvement. We just need to bring that same set of thinking and that management science that works throughout our clinical operations into our food and nutrition services. And the key to quality is measurement. And when you measure and start to see how you're doing, you then create feedback loops. And where you err are the areas where you focus and you fix things. And so, we see measurement as critical. And with food waste, I mean, that's what we do at Leanpath. I imagine many of you know, we create systems to measure wasted food. And the concept is, once you measure it on a daily basis and make that part of your operation, you learn and improve, and it changes your culture. And, there's this great quote that I love, and it's from Buckminster Fuller. And he says, if you want to change the way people think, don't bother. Instead, give them a tool. And through the use of that tool, it will change the way they think and how they work. And so that's the other part of measurement, is that the moment you task your frontline teams with measuring, you're giving them a tool that they interact with on a daily basis that changes how they think. It focuses culture and it changes behavior. And so I love to really just remind people that measurement isn't just about the data you get from the process. Measurement itself is the first intervention in changing any system, because nothing you measure, that measurement doesn't occur invisibly, it occurs visibly. And while you're doing that, people are going to change how they think. And so that's, we see with food waste, hugely high impact. When people start measuring every day, they cut it in half.
Yeah, and you mentioned tools that you interact with that change how you think, and I kind of feel like that takes us over to Richard. That's something at Frontier Energy you do a lot of, right, is creating these tools to help measure the energy savings and help, quantify the benefits. So, Richard, let's talk a little bit about carbon footprint, zero carbon, electrification. Why should we be concerned, and where does one start?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I keep telling people we're in the midst of an energy revolution like we have never seen before. Well, basically haven't seen since the early 20th century. We kind of put systems together in the early 20th century, 1910s, 1920s. We sort of started building out what things were going to look like. And over the next 100 years, we built this system out. And all of that is changing. And here's kind of what's happening. For the last, 30 years that I've been in sustainability, the message was really, you should do efficiency, you should do sustainability. It's good for the planet, go for it. And everybody's like, oh, I want a big sustainability hug, let's do it. Okay, so we've made lots of gains, but we haven't really ever put the rubber to the road like we needed to, because all along we're being like, do efficiency because the train is about to run over us. It's coming down the tracks, and we'd be like, okay, we'll do some, but we'll put the rest tomorrow, right? So our voluntary decarbonization, voluntary energy efficiency has not been really taking us where we want to go. It works, but not like we need to. So this big revolution that's about to happen, and that we're in the middle of it right now, is that we're going to go from the voluntary energy efficiency notion and voluntary decarbonization to decarbonization that is mandated by municipal, state, and eventually national codes and standards. Okay. And in California, you've already seen that. And in Seattle, you've seen that as well, right? With these electrification reach codes, building reach codes, that is that first stage. And basically what happened is the industry and the policymakers got together and say, we got to do something here. We're moving too slow. It's critical. So the decarbonization thing is going to happen. Okay, it's going to happen, and it's going to be now mandated. So that's a big change. And I just want to give everybody that heads up to try and get ahead of it. Now, I don't see that as a bad thing. Okay. The ultimate goal is zero net carbon by 2050. And a lot of cities and a lot of your organizations really have very aggressive goals for 2030. We really need to kick things in. And this is like a health issue as much as an environmental issue, right? So all of this stuff is coming together, and now the wheels are turning. But the couple of big challenges that everybody worries about with this whole notion of kitchen decarbonization or electrification, there are two big challenges. One is behavior. Can I get somebody to cook on electricity instead of natural gas? Okay. And the second big challenge is the fact that electricity costs more than natural gas. And those are big challenges for somebody who's got a small independent restaurant that's a steakhouse, or they're using a gas wok, right? But for healthcare, you guys are already way ahead of this and can work around a lot of these challenges already. That difference in fuel cost, not such a big deal, because you've got massive buildings with massive air handlers and MRI machines that, the kitchen is not the biggest load in the building in some hospitals. So you can get around the cost challenge. And then this behavioral challenge of shifting people off of, my traditional sauteing on a gas range. You're not doing tons of that in a healthcare kitchen. So you're already way ahead. So the next step is to now work with designers and to start thinking, what's my kitchen of the future? How do I bring in these processes, and how do I pivot, right? And once again, the pivot, the beauty of the pivot is it's going to solve issues like food waste, and it's going to solve issues like labor, and it's going to make your kitchen more comfortable, right? And Gina, it's going to mean you do move fewer steps. And also a lot of, when you talk about the measurement, HACCP, that thing is moving to the point where all HACCP is going to have to be automated, right? No longer can you walk around with a clipboard and say, I think it was 140 degrees. It's all got to be automated. Those same systems that are doing automated temperature can be used to automate your and track your energy usage and your building maintenance, right? So that's why I say we're in this revolution. We are moving towards electrification. It'll move slower than some people want and faster than other people won't, but it is coming down the line. And in healthcare kitchens, the thing you'll need to be thinking about is, and you already do a lot of this. How do I pivot my production using cook chill, using sous vide, blast chillers? You're already doing a lot of this. And how do I stage my food, so that I've got holding cabinets that are using technology and retherming things at the right time, and so my food tastes good when it gets to the tray. It's really a win-win situation. But ultimately, my message is it's coming, so don't hide your head. Be involved and get ahead of this. And coming back to a point that Andrew made earlier, there definitely is a direct correlation between reducing your food waste and cutting your carbon, not just on the food transportation and all this side, but also in the kitchen. If you cook less food, then you actually reduce your waste. And one time I just did it, for my own joy, a little modeling of a kitchen. And I showed that like a 10% reduction in food waste was cutting my energy by about 4%. And so once again, that's just money in the bank. So yes, I see this as a win-win, but once again, don't hide and use those resources, those utility resources to get ahead.
Well, and I think we can all use as many win-wins as we can get, right? And
yes.
So we've talked a little bit about food waste, we talked a little bit about carbon footprint, energy efficiency. So Gina, when you talk footprint, what about local sourcing? And how does one start, incorporating local sourcing and purchasing?
Yeah, great question. And it pains me to say that over the course of the pandemic, we actually lost some ground in terms of that goal, in terms of our local purchasing, which is also something that we measure. We've been talking a lot about measurement. Some of our local businesses that we partnered with are unfortunately no longer in business. Obviously, it's been a rough year and a half. So that's a measurement that has taken a hit for us, and it's something that we'll need to focus our efforts on more in the future.
How did you? So I understand that it's taken a little bit of a hit, but can you just recommend or a few pointers on what you did to kind of start with local sourcing? Did you take one item and try to figure out how you do that?
Sure. Yeah. So, that's part of our tracking. So on those Excel spreadsheets that I talked about, we do track what is local. Local, defined by Seattle Children's, is within Washington State. I know a lot of areas have many different definitions. Some use a mile radius, and some use a region. And we at Seattle Children's consider Washington State as local. And so we track that on our giant spreadsheet. And for each product that we bring in, we consider whether it's local, whether it falls under one of our sustainability definitions, whether it be, for instance, cage-free, antibiotic-free, dolphin safe, all those different sustainable qualifiers. And that's something that we consider with each product that we're considering bringing in. So for instance, if a product is local and sustainable and it checks a number of those boxes, that's something that's going to get higher consideration to come in through the doors than a product that isn't. And we have a great sourcing team that work really closely with our vendors. And we're constantly in conversations with our vendors as well as with our GPO, our group purchasing organization, letting them know what our goals are, that we're looking for antibiotic-free meats, we're looking for local sustainable products, that we're looking for, more plant protein options, all those kinds of things. And we're having those constant conversations with them so that they're suggesting those items to us that meet those needs. Mm-hmm. So really close partnership and collaboration, I would say.
And so it sounds like communication. I mean, communication is a big part of it, right? Communicating what you're trying to do, what you want to do, and then finding the team to help you to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to you. I'm enjoying everything you guys are sharing. It's fun. There's so many words that you all use. I've got the one that's really sticking out to me right now is sustainability hug. I think that might have been a Richard term, Of course. And that's embracing sustainability, right? And that's what this is all about, and helping people understand how to be more comfortable with moving forward on the initiatives. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, scary, or any of that good stuff. And there's so much to sustainability, and there's a team of people to help you out. So I think we're getting right up to 3:20. We have a couple of questions that I would like to, from the audience, that I would like to ask. So let's go ahead and jump into some Q&A. And for everybody that is out there, our audience, feel free to use the Q&A box to post your questions, and we'll go from there. So Gina, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat. No, not really the hot seat, but what is the next?
Already hot enough here.
Well, exactly. I know it is hot, isn't it? What is the next sustainability challenge you hope to tackle at Seattle Children's?
Yeah, mostly it's a continuation of work that we've already been doing. We've been working on meat reduction for a while, but that's our biggest focus in terms of sustainability for this next year is further meat reduction. We've signed on with the Cool Food Pledge. And so we've been, to Andrew's point about tracking and making things visible and you move the things that you measure. That's something that we've been making visible to the team. So not only do we track our total meat purchases, but we're also tracking our meat ounces per plate. And that normalizes our metric by volumes, because otherwise you could compare, pre-pandemic meat purchasing to pandemic meat purchasing and pat ourselves in the back and say, oh, we've done such a great job. Well, we've purchased less because we've had fewer volumes. So when you normalize for our volumes, that number becomes, much more meaningful. But we also translate the number with the Cool Food Pledge. They give you a complicated formula to convert your meat purchases into greenhouse gas emissions and to how many cars it takes off the road. So that's something that I think is really impactful to the team, and it helps people get behind to say, we removed 90 cars from the road over the course of the year through our purchasing decisions over the course of last year. So that's something that's really impactful to the team. And then, of course, as we're doing that meat reduction work, we're incorporating more plant-forward menu options, which, to Andrew's point about equity, that really helps address our equity and diversity of our diverse population that we serve. And
Well,
then,
and
if I could add even one more thing, with all of our equipment purchases, to Richard's point, we do consider the energy draw for every equipment purchase, and we have a close relationship with our sustainability officer in the organization, and she's helping us review the energy draw of every piece of equipment that we bring in.
Mhm.
Well, and I think that that's one area, that's so often overlooked. Richard, you can speak to that too, is the energy usage of the equipment in the kitchen, right? And that's a big part of a sustainability initiative. If you're overlooking that.
Mhm. Yeah. And Gina, and everybody listening, I'll just mention when you say she's looking at the energy draw, the question is, how is she looking at it? Because let's see if I could do an analogy. If you just take an oven and you look at, say, it's got this many, BTU is on its nameplate, and you try to estimate energy draws in that way, you will misestimate royally how much energy you'll end up using. It's kind of like looking at a car and saying, well, it has this many horsepower and thinking, well, I'll use this much gasoline, when no, you don't run a car at, full horsepower all the time. So there's some subtlety there. Once again, that's why I like to steer people towards the utility incentives, because we kind of done the number crunching, and that'll guide you some, but also just encourage people to kind of think that bigger picture and try to model the kitchen out, work with some professionals and figure out how the pieces interact with each other and how much energy they're truly using. Because the nameplate is great for knowing how big a pipe you need for something or how big a wire, but it's no good at figuring out how much energy something will use, right? So there's that level of energy efficiency that you want to take into account and try to use those technical resources where you can.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Gina. We have another question here from Elliot. So I'm going to try to share this one here with you. Great conversation. Economic sustainability in a region is crucial. Fewer food miles, fresher products. Like Gina alluded, economically and environmentally sustainable products are more valuable and can be more economical, but they're often hard to source. So how do we support buyers and food service directors to build the relationships with suppliers of the products that are sustainable and locally grown? I think, Gina, maybe that one's a little bit to you, is just, you're talking about buying local. How do you source the local products and develop that relationship with vendors?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's something that I honestly don't have the answer to. It has been a struggle for us looking at different food hubs in the past. One of the barriers to moving in that direction for the past for us has been the reliability of the distribution. Certainly that there are solutions out there that probably have overcome that issue, but the last time we looked at it, that was a concern for us in terms of reliability for how much we needed. And of course, in healthcare, you're kind of locked into your menus, right? They're in your menu software system, they're printed on your menus. So your patients are expecting those things and you have to have it. So you have to have, you know, a certain amount of product X. You can't run out. Substitutions have a real, provide a lot of challenges because you have to update your menu software system every time. So in the past, that has been a barrier for us. And I'm not saying that that certainly is not something that has been overcome. We just haven't looked at it recently. But really the reliability of the distribution channel was a problem for us that we, which is why we haven't moved in that direction at this time. It's something that we look at though.
Great, well, thank you so much. So it looks like we're rounding up right around 3:27, so close to closing time here. I want to thank everybody for attending today, and we do have another poll that we would like to post. And before we close out, just in kind of closing and wrap everything up, you know, again, I think it goes back to you all exude all this passion for sustainability, and I understand why. And I think you've shared a lot of really good information, bite-sized pieces of information that I feel are digestible, and, you know, kind of that setting a goal and an achievable goal, and then measurement, and, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? So I appreciate all of the really good information that you have shared with everybody today. And we will put up a slide here at the end with contact information for each one of you, so our attendees can reach out to you with further questions. So let's go ahead and launch this poll, and then we have Zach Schwab's going to join us, so don't go away just yet.
Well, that was such a great webinar. You know, I learned so much, and I know here at Swedish, we're really committed to sustainability. We're trying for our award next year. So I want to thank Andrew, Richard, Janelle, Gina for the awesome webinar. Really enjoyed it. I learned so much about sustainability and ways to get it done. I also want to thank everyone that was able to attend to the webinar, and I really want to quickly share some upcoming events. So our big AHF national event is coming up August 23rd through the 26th, and it's going to be in Dallas, Texas. But if you can't make it, it's okay. There is some virtual ways to go about going. Also in July 20th, we're going to have a coffee hour from 2:30 to 3:30, and those are really fun. That's just time to talk to your peers, our business partners, and kind of see what's going on, how we're navigating COVID and best practice. And I've really enjoyed all those. I learned so much. So that's all I have. I just want to thank everyone again. That's a great webinar, and we have some more content coming on later in the year. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. We are posting all of the recorded webinars to the AHF Washington chapter YouTube channel as well. So if you want to revisit this, it should be posted here shortly. Thanks again for attending, and you have a great afternoon.